You know, open water fishing in these below freezing conditions can be a lot of fun. There's a few little things you can do to make your day more enjoyable on the water. One thing you have to keep in mind is water freezes immediately as soon as it gets into the air temperature. So what I like to do each and every time I move to a different location and stow my trolling motor is I take a rag, and as I bring that trolling motor in and I pull the shaft into the steering motor, I wipe it down and get the moisture off there. If you don't do that, this will freeze into the steering motor and can be very difficult to redeploy that motor the next time you move. Little things like this can make your day on the open water in these cold conditions much more enjoyable.
There's one. Good one, Tom. Yep.
Oh yeah, it feels like a nice one.
Look at Kemos go in the back of the boat.
Now it's kind of acting like Mr. Whiskers, isn't it? I was just dragging it that time.
What do you got here? Oh, nice sauger.
There we go.
They're so fat.
These are the coolest looking fish, too.
They are, aren't they?
I wonder if a guy could have a pair of cowboy boots made out of one of those.
Well, maybe.
We're out here, we're in some extreme conditions. The water temperatures are very cold. Typically when that happens, the fish a lot of times will react to basically a do-nothing type of a technique, which we like to call a hovering technique. It's vertical jigging, but basically you just make bottom contact and you pick that jig up and you just hold it. You stand like a statue and just wait for that fish to come up and grab the jig. It's very important though in this technique to understand that with the variety of different jigs that are out there today, there's several that really are specific for that technique. And what I have here is a 90-degree jig head and a 60-degree jig head. When you're doing this hovering technique, you want to use a 90-degree head. I'll use the 60-degree jig head when I'm pitching, but today, basically several different types of tails. We're using ribworm. You just want to make sure that you rig that worm up nice and straight so that when you pick that jig up off the bottom, it sits nice and horizontal. If you couple that rigging with that 90-degree line-tied jig, you're going to get a lot more bites under tough winter conditions like this.
Hot topics, leading information, and tackle and techniques to make you a better angler. Presented by Mercury.
All the time when I pull up to parking lots or gas stations, I get the question, what the heck is this thing? This is actually a shallow water anchor. So the idea behind it is if you're in shallow water and say you want to do some pitching or some casting or whatever, you can actually lower this down, it scissors out, and it'll stick down into the bottom. So this would keep going down and actually stick in the bottom. So that's one way to use this thing. Now as a walleye fisherman, what I'm more often going to use it for is as a drift paddle. So what I'm going to do is put this paddle on here quick, and then we're going to go out on the water. I'm going to show you a couple different situations where I actually use this drift paddle to give me better boat control. First thing I want to talk about is trolling, and what the drift paddle is mainly going to give you here is some speed control. Now the nice thing is compared to say throwing out a drift sock, is that you can change the speed that you're going by simply raising and lowering that paddle. If you bring it up out of the water just a little and just leave a little bit of the paddle in, it's only going to slow you down a little. If you really sink it down into the water, it's going to slow you down even more. I've had on a lot of boats, like running my big engine, where I can slow this boat down a good mile and a quarter slower than you can on a regular troll. So that's one thing, you've got speed control. The other thing that drift paddle is going to give you is it's going to reduce the amount of surge that the boat has as you're trolling along. And I find this is really important, especially with spinner fishing. A lot of times, especially in dirty water, if that spinner is surging, that walleye has a hard time tracking it. If you give it a lot nicer, steadier pull, then that walleye can track it, you're going to get more bites and more fish in the boat. The last thing about this is if you do happen to get a fish on, the beauty of this is if you're reeling in a fish, you can simply put this thing up, get it out of the way, fight the fish in, then set it back in and start fishing again. So let's go over and look at a second scenario where this can really help with boat control. And that's drifting along a break, you know, whether that's a shoreline break or reef or whatever. First thing I'm going to do here is put my power pole down. And you'll notice that I had the paddle more in a parallel position to the boat. So what it's doing is, as I'm drifting along here, it's slowing down the back of the boat, and then I'm simply using my trolling motor up here to control the front of the boat. Now, the real beauty of this over, say, a drift sock is that when you've got to move in and out on that brake, say you're trying to hold a particular depth and you've got to slide a little in, you just simply point your trolling motor backwards. With this, you slide in, that drift paddle cuts through the water. You don't have to drag it around like a bag. So it cuts through, slides back, you get back in the right depth again, and you're all set up to be drifting down again. If you got to pull out, same thing. You just pull forward, it cuts through the water real nice. So this gives you great control, not only with speed, but to quickly stay on your depth as you're drifting down those brakes, and really gives you nice boat control doing this. So this power pole was made to be a shallow water anchor. Works for that. But as a walleye fisherman, for trolling and for drifting, that's where I get the big advantage.